Well, good morning, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak before this body, present some ideas about education, ethics, and terminology in the context of the NAS report. It's certainly my pleasure to be here. Ken and Mark spoke about the structure of the committee, the subcommittee, and the IWG, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. But when you distill the matter at hand, boil down the question is what needs to be done to properly address education, ethics, and terminology in the context of the NAS report. Luckily, the report laid down some recommendations. It's a path, it's a roadmap to follow. There's some overarching recommendations as well as some subparts. So when I think about education and ethics and terminology in that report, similar to what Jeff did, we did some word searching and find out where the terms pop up in the report. First and foremost, we found one in recommendation number 1. The overarching recommendation is calling for the creation of a NIFS, a National Institute of Forensic Sciences. But in the subparts of that recommendation, you can see the words education mentioned. Education programs, educational programs, and educational standards and accreditation of forensic science programs. So we set out on a path, we start to follow a road and look at the recommendations where the terms that our IWG is processing show up in the report. Recommendation number 2 deals with standards for reporting and testifying, and certainly there will be crossover in projects and work done by various IWGs, but when you look into the discussion around recommendation number 2, you see minimum or established standard terminology. Terminology is a big issue to tackle under this project, and we certainly acknowledge that there's going to be crossover between the various IWGs when we encounter terminology issues. So recommendation number 2, terminology. And one of the things, one thing we'll discover too in this process, I think when we look at the recommendations from the report, the body of the report will become victims of serendipity. The report lays out some guidelines and a road to follow, but we're certainly going to discover things along the way that will be very educational. We'll find new things to look into as well. In ethics, we find the mention in recommendation number 9, calling for a national code of ethics. The discussion says, establish a code of ethics for all forensic science disciplines, encourage individual societies to incorporate this code into their professional code, and explore mechanisms of enforcement. It's just not good enough anymore to have a code of ethics and to maybe or maybe not participate, but actually put some teeth into the matter, and that leads to credibility of our profession overall. In the area of education, again, recommendation number 10 dealt with graduate education programs and fellowships in forensic sciences. So we found education, again, mentioned in the language, so we thought it important to look at this particular recommendation. And in particular, continuing legal education programs. We're going to spend a lot of time discussing educating the legal community, especially with all the advancements in technology that happen in forensic science. The lawyers are a stakeholder, they're a customer of what we do. It's certainly important to keep them up to speed on the most recent advancements. Last but not least, the things that we'll touch on in the recommendations for education, ethics, and terminology. Recommendation number 11 dealt with death investigation, and they call for education and training in forensic pathology. And I mentioned that discussion certainly continues, but we keyed in on education and training in forensic pathology. That being said, from the recommendations, we do have an IWG to address these matters. I'm a co-chair. Rob Lesnovich from Treasury is a co-chair as well, and I certainly want to acknowledge the work that he's done thus far on the project. And Katie Suchma from the FBI is our executive secretary. She's done a lot of the heavy lifting so far in the project. As early on as we are, we've actually done some work, but Katie's done a lot of heavy lifting. And then the IWG members are comprised of a broad consortium of forensic practitioners and managers in various disciplines. The subcommittee luckily gave us IWG some marching orders. They said, hey, here's some potential activities to explore as you embark on the process of addressing the recommendations in the report. So in education, they said, take a look at formal degree programs, continuing education for the stakeholders, the practitioners, the prosecutors, defenders, judges. Look at the delivery mechanisms for education in forensic sciences, And last but not least, look at what is in existence to educate the population, maybe juries, people who are going to sit as customers of forensic science products and make determinations. In the area of ethics, the marching orders were to develop and/or work with external groups to develop or select a code of ethics. That's a very short phrase on the slide, but I think it's a very daunting task. That one's going to take a lot of time and energy. We are fortunate to have on our IWG Ken, who is very passionate about ethics, so I'm sure he'll be a major contributor to the work that we have to do in this area. In the area of terminology, the subcommittee recommended to develop terminology and definitions for expert conclusions and opinions. Another huge task to undertake when you look at forensic sciences across the board. And certainly this will require broader participation amongst all of the IWGs that are working on various issues, but amongst the forensic science community at large. You see collaboration, coordination, and I certainly want to echo those terms. We can't solve these things on our own. We're certainly going to need input and assistance from the forensic science community. When we sat down as co-chairs and the executive secretary of this group, we realized that we have a roadmap. If we look at the NAS report, we have some guidelines along the way from the subcommittee, some things to follow, but we thought we better set our own compass so we don't stray too far afield. And the things that we need to key in on and not lose sight of, we're going to investigate, analyze, and develop recommendations. We want to stay true to that as we embark in the process. Let the work begin. We're in the process of gathering vast amounts of information, and we're already accumulating data as part of this project. But when we look at formal degree programs, these are the things that we are attempting to accomplish. Look at the degree programs nationwide, evaluate accredited versus non-accredited programs, accrediting entities, and you can see the items on the slide. I want to touch briefly on core requirements. For example, if you wish to be a forensic scientist and a forensic chemist in the Drug Enforcement Administration, we are going to look that you have 30 requisite hours of chemistry in your educational background. It's just a requirement to work for DEA, Department of Justice. And I think that will go a long way to identify and address these issues when we hear claims that forensic science is not rooted in life or physical sciences. So we can certainly start to address this matter by looking at the core requirements for various educational programs in forensic science. When addressing continuing education, we are starting to ask questions of practitioners about the agency requirements for training prior to starting casework, continuing education, what's available from the vendors, maybe instrument manufacturers, what kind of training does your agency allow you to participate in, conferences, et cetera, and then users. We set out initially to define users as attorneys, judges, field agents, et cetera. Those are customers of the products that we produce. And then we want to identify opportunities available through law schools or bar associations to see what's available for the attorneys to stay educated as forensic science technology advances. In the area of layperson education, we want to take a look at how potential jury members are in fact educated about forensic science, and we hope it's not fiction television. Education and training programs, like I mentioned, we're going to look at in-house training programs for federal agencies and state and local agency as well. What models exist? What are the requirements for training an analyst prior to turning them loose with casework? And in the field of ethics, we're starting to ask questions and explore the various codes of ethics that are out amongst forensic science practitioners. And then we'll do some cataloging. As scientists, we like to separate things. I like to separate components of a mixture. It's my favorite thing to do. But we'll look at professional organizations, certifying organizations, accrediting bodies, agencies, laboratories, and certainly the SWIGs. Information gathering for terminology. We'll look at standards and guidelines, and this will obviously cause some crossover with IWGs that exist as well. Which standards are mandatory, evaluate whether or not and to what extent terminology intersects with codes of ethics. So we have a set of standard terms that we're going to use, but are you bound ethically, or are you obliged by your agency to use those terms to help postulate your conclusion? And that'll involve coordination with other groups as well. In summary, I would say that it's a long process. We've only just begun, and I would echo the thoughts of the other speakers to say that it will certainly involve collaboration and coordination from the forensic science community at large. And with that said, thank you very much for your attention.